spent years wearing armor, trying to be who they said, carrying voices of doubt, echoing inside my head. But you called through the noise, spoke my name in the night, reminded me who I am in the power of your light. I am unshakable, stronger than the truth I know. Fear may try to take my breath.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Unshakeable Uplift. This is episode 1 of season 2, and I'm super excited to be back. And if you joined us for season 1, we spent 10 episodes talking through identity, who we are, and what our foundation is built on. We talked about the frame, the foundation, and the finish. And if you want to go back and catch those episodes, they're pretty great. It just really helps you look at what your foundation is built on. And so we explored what it means to become unshakable. And unshakable doesn't necessarily mean that life gets easier or that problems don't happen. We become stronger because our foundation is more solid. We talked about purpose, and we talked about becoming your authentic self. One of my real key points in everything that I do and teach and talk about is genuinely embracing your own true authentic identity, because you were made with purpose and you are here on purpose for a purpose. And that is part of what makes you unshakable. And so this season, we're going to take 10 episodes and talk about something that is basically becoming an epidemic, not only in the United States, but really around the world. And that's the topic of burnout. And it's very confusing to understand what burnout really is, what is medical fatigue, what is other things. But we're going to explore during the next 10 weeks what burnout is, what it's not, the different stages of it, how you recover from it, and what life looks like after burnout. And so you might be curious or asking, why does she care about this so much? Well, my own personal story is that a year ago this month, I got laid off from my corporate job. And I knew it had been very stressful and I was really exhausted. And I knew there was a good chance I was going to get laid off. It did happen. And then the next few weeks, I figured a week or two and I would bounce back and just jump right back into life. And that's really not what happened. So a little bit later in the episode today, I'm going to share more of my personal story. But I really want to connect with a lot of you because it's high-performing men and women even more so than men, high capacity, really strong and compassionate, faith-filled, caring people are the ones that end up in burnout. And so we don't like to admit that we're never enough, but that feeling of insufficiency, and there's a clinical term called chronic insufficiency. And we're not going to use a lot of medical or psychological terms here, but this chronic insufficiency idea is not doubting your ability. You're doubting whether your ability at any level could ever be sufficient. So it's not imposter syndrome. It's not the I'm not good enough. It's closer to there is no enough. And that's what opens the door and leads us into burnout. And burnout is not this, I need a bubble bath and a glass of wine kind of tired. It's that bone deep, soul weary, I don't recognize myself anymore, kind of exhausted. If you're the person that is always getting things done for you and others, if you're the one that they call, You're strong, you're dependable, you're capable. This episode and this series of episodes is for you. Here's the truth. Burnout does not happen to weak people. It happens to the ones who care the most, push the hardest, and carry the loads. And so again, as I mentioned, I had discovered that I had burnout about a year ago, and I was working a full-time job and then building my coaching and speaking and writing business on the side. I was essentially working a full-time job and another half-time job. And I was able to do that and keep going, or so I thought. I didn't recognize the warning signs. There were yellow flashing lights, there were orange flashing lights, and then there's a red flashing light. And so by the end of this episode, I want you to recognize 3 different things. What burnout actually is, why you're not alone in it, even though it can feel incredibly isolating. And most importantly, I want to show you that there's a way back. Full recovery is possible. So stick with me as we walk through this. So let's take just a couple of minutes and talk about and define what burnout is and isn't. So in my corporate life, I was a project manager. And one of the things I always wanted to do was be very clear about what something was, but also define what it was not. Because knowing and identifying both of those gives you a more full picture and a better perspective. And so burnout is not just stress. Stress is part of burnout or leads to burnout, but it's an indicator, not what it is. And so we think we're just under stress, and we're under stress for an extended period of time. And that does open the door to burnout. And so the World Health Organization classifies burnout as an occupational phenomenon, another big word. It's not a medical condition, but it's a syndrome that results from chronic stress that hasn't been successfully managed. I would take that definition even a little bit further, because burnout doesn't just live in our day jobs or even our own businesses. It's in our marriages, it's in our parenting, it's in our ministry, and it's in our friendships. Anywhere that we are chronically overextended without enough replenishment. So here's a super simple way to think about burnout. Burnout is what happens when the output of your life constantly and consistently exceeds the input for too long of a period of time. So if you think about your phone battery, right? We all have our phones. They all need charged. And so when your battery on your phone is down to 2% or less, you plug it in and you give it an hour or 2 to charge. We don't do that for ourselves. We get down to that 2% battery, 1%, 0.5%, the phone battery dies, and we keep going. Right? Anybody hear me? Anybody raise your hand going, yeah, that's me. Okay. So burnout can show up in 3 different ways. The first one is emotional and physical exhaustion. And this is not the kind of tired that just a good night's sleep will fix. It might take a month or 2 of good nights of sleep to fix it. Cynicism and detachment. You just start to feel numb toward the things that you used to love. The mom who used to treasure putting her kids to bed at night, reading stories, tucking them in, now dreads that time. The employee who used to feel her purpose and have that verve and that zest and her love of her job now just feels like a machine going through the motions. And there's also a reduced sense of accomplishment. Even though you're doing more than ever, you feel like you're failing at everything. Okay, so that's just some of the indicators of what burnout is and can start to look like. So now let's talk about what burnout is not, because it's also very, very important. Burnout is not being lazy. In fact, it's the opposite. Burnout is typically caused by too much effort for too long. It is kind of that opposite of being lazy. Burnout is not a character flaw. It is not a spiritual failure. Some of us were raised to believe that if we just trusted God more or prayed harder, we wouldn't feel this way. But that's not true, and it's not fair. And we are oftentimes violating spiritual principles when we get ourselves into burnout. And then burnout is not clinical depression, although those two can overlap and sometimes go hand in hand. So if any one of you that are listening today is experiencing persistent hopelessness, a true loss of interest in everything, or any thoughts of self-harm, I really encourage you to get some professional help. That is also not weakness. Sometimes you need that outside perspective just to help give you a different assessment of what's really going on. There is no shame in treating your mental health as important as your physical health. And if you're having spiritual challenges, find a pastor or a coach, a spiritual coach, or a trusted mentor or advisor. Again, very biblical principles. Okay, and burnout, the last thing here, burnout is not a one-time event. This is not I had a project and I pushed really hard for a week or two, it's over, and now I can rest up and kind of start life again. Burnout is a slow erosion. It's exactly why so many of us don't see it coming. And so let's talk a little bit about how does burnout happen? Okay, it's like, what do I look for? You know, the question is, how does a capable, faithful woman like me end up in burnout, right? It's like, how did I get here? You know, it's the old joke about, what am I doing in this handbasket and where am I going? Hopefully some of you get that phrase and the analogy. So it's never usually one big thing. It's 1,000 small withdrawals from an account that never got deposits. And I don't know if any of you remember Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Effectual People. He talked about the concept of an emotional bank account. And it's like when you're building connection with people, I have to make deposits into you to build that relationship. You make deposits back into me. And so in that emotional bank account idea, it's a mutual exchange. With burnout, you keep withdrawing from your bank account. You may be doing emotional deposits here and spiritual deposits there and physical deposits there and idea deposits there and energy deposits there. And you're giving and giving and giving and giving, but you're not replenishing. And that's the pattern we see over and over again in high-performing men and women. So the first thing I want to talk about in this is identity fusion. Again, kind of a funny phrase, but somewhere along the way, what we do becomes the definition of our worth and value. We're not just working hard. Our worth feels tied to our outcome. So we can't just try. We have to succeed or we feel like a failure. And so there's 2 or 3 more points we're going to talk about, but we're going to take just a short break. And when we come back, we'll dig even deeper into how did I get here? Come right back. This is Coach Lysa with Unshakeable Uplift, and here is today's Unshakable Living Tip. You are not behind. You may feel like you are, but you're not. If you feel like you should be further along by now, hear this clearly. You are right where you're supposed to be. Growth is seasonal. Flowers don't grow and bloom all at the same time. Healing is layered. We peel back layer by layer. Again, it takes time. There are times and seasons. And calling and purpose and destiny unfold like a beautiful flower opening up. And so we talk about that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison rushes you. Trust anchors you. So today's tip is stop measuring yourself against anybody else's timeline. You're not late, you're becoming. Welcome back. We are in episode 1 of season 2 talking about burnout. And we just talked about identity fusion, that sometimes what we do becomes the more defining characteristic of who we are than our own self-worth. And so the second indicator of burnout is chronic overfunctioning. Again, high performers, we're the ones who step in when there's a crisis. We step in when somebody's sick. We step in when things aren't going well. It's like, give me the ball, let me drive the length of the court and make the basket. We're reliable, and so we become the default. Slowly, our capacity gets treated as infinite by those around us, including ourselves. We don't recognize our own limits and boundaries, and we consistently push beyond them. And then there's the absence of margin. So let me tell you what I mean by margin. Margin is the space between your load and your limit. Most of us have been operating with zero margin for so long, we've forgotten it's even supposed to exist, or that it's okay to have margin. Okay, I'm going to say that again. We have operated with zero margin for so long, we've forgotten that margin is supposed to exist. It is supposed to be part of the picture. Every hour is accounted for. Every ounce of energy is spoken for before the day even begins. And so next, and this is a big one for women of faith, is the misuse of sacrificial theology. And so I don't know what religious background any of you have, but I grew up kind of under the teaching that you give and give and give, and that you do for God. You are building the kingdom for God. We use servanthood and selflessness and laying down our lives for others, but that gets twisted into our own believing that our own limits, needs, and rest don't matter. We push beyond what God ever asked us to do, or called us to do, or expects of us. We expect more of ourselves than what God does. And that does not line up with his principles, and particularly the principle of rest. Rest is a God-given weapon and recovery mechanism. We forget that even Jesus withdrew to lonely places to pray. He needed that margin. He needed that white space. He needed that time alone. And one of the things that I have not done recently that I need to add back into my own calendar is simply thinking time. There are times that I need to just sit and be able to contemplate and process and think about those things. And for a while, I actually had an hour or two on my calendar every week that was blocked out, and it was literally labeled thinking time. It's just that time with no pressure, no to-do list, but just to let things process through. That's a form of white space or margin, and we really need to build that back in. If the Son of God needed to pull away from people and demands and rest, shouldn't we follow his example? And so in myself, as I've already mentioned, I was working full-time, building my business and doing all these other things. And I talk about that by the time I recognized that I was in burnout, there was no gas left in my tank. This was beyond just running on fumes. I was so past fumes. Do you remember that the cartoons where somebody's chasing and the person runs out off the edge of the cliff and they're running on thin air and they recognize it. They're out there for a few seconds and then they fall. That's kind of where I was. I joke about, and it's really not a joke, I was running on sheer willpower and muscle memory. Okay. I was going through the motions. I was doing the things, and I thought I was doing really great, not realizing what I was doing to myself. Okay. And so when I got laid off, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I figured I'd take a week or two and rest and bounce back. And just being real transparent, every day for the first 2 weeks after I got laid off, I would sleep at night and take a 3-hour nap every day. And again, this high performer in me is going, okay, another day or two of that and I'll be okay. 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by, a month went by. And that's when I started asking God, what's going on here? And he showed me to do some research on burnout. And so it was a month or even 6 weeks after my layoff before I started forming this concept that this was more than just overstress and fatigue. This was burnout. And I started researching and learning about burnout. And so honestly, the last year has been my burnout recovery period. And so we're going to talk a little bit about, that there is hope. If you're in burnout, there is a way out of it. There is a full recovery. Okay. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I do want to take a little bit different tact here and talk about another element that connects with burnout that really makes it worse. It exacerbates it. And I'm going to just briefly reflect back to COVID, because in 2020, COVID shaped and changed burnout for a lot of women. And if you lived through that season, this might connect some dots for you. So before the pandemic, work and home had separate walls. There was division. You could leave the office and mentally leave work at work and come home and do home things. With COVID, those walls collapsed. Suddenly your kitchen table was your desk, your classroom, and your dinner table all at once. And research backs up what so many of us have felt in ourselves and our bones. During the pandemic, when two parents both ended up working at home, the moms picked up even a heavier load. Dads jumped in, did some more of the housework, did some of the caretaking for the kids, but so did the moms. And it expanded the moms' load even more than the dads. And again, no judgment here, no shame, but it is a documented, recognized fact that COVID hit moms even harder than dads in many cases. And so in homes where only the mom worked remotely, mom was at home working, dad was at the office, those mom became the default for everything. Schooling, meals, the emotional load of this beautiful household while still trying to hit work deadlines and get all of that done. So while COVID didn't invent burnout, it tore down this last buffer that some of us women had. When home and work merged into one space, the mental load increased and it becomes impossible to set down because there's no separation. Okay, there was no commute to listen to music or listen to a podcast or decompress. It was 10 steps from the kitchen to your office. There was no buffer, there was no separation. And so if you recognized your roots of burnout started in that season or really haven't let up since, I want to affirm to you, you're not imagining it. It's a very real thing. This isn't a failure to adapt. This was an unknown and unprecedented collapse of these walls and boundaries. And it happened to millions of women all at once. And here's part of what makes it sneaky. Burnout doesn't announce itself. You don't hear a knock on the door internally and it goes, hey, by the way, you're on the verge of burnout. It just doesn't happen that way. It seeps in through 1,000 yeses. It seeps in through day-to-day repetition, the over and over. It comes when you say yes too many times when you needed to say no. You skipped your own rest because somebody else needed something. I'll deal with this later is your standard phrase. And that later is I'll deal with it next week. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Whatever you put off. Okay. Now we're going to make one more connection before we close out today's episode. And there is this correlation between loneliness and burnout. They're deeply intertwined and they feed each other. And so it works both directions. Burnout creates loneliness. When you're depleted, you don't have the emotional bandwidth for deep, honest connection, authentic connection. Relationships take energy, texting people back, showing up for people, being vulnerable, doing the inner work that as coaches we encourage people to do. It all takes energy. When you are running on empty, connection starts to feel like one more task on your to-do list. And I'm going to be really honest with you. There were days that prayer or devotion time or journaling and even God became one more task on my to-do list. There was no reciprocal value to it. It was like, I do this because I'm obligated. I do this because I'm supposed to. That word should really creeps in at this point. You know, and again, in the coaching world, we have a phrase that says, don't should on yourself. Don't should yourself into making commitments you really know are not right for you. Don't should yourself into burnout, but we do it over and over and over again. We're human. You don't want to cancel plans. You don't want to let people down. You stop returning people's calls though. You don't text them back or it's the next day or 2 days later. And you start with, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you right away. People understand. There's not always this expectation of immediate response. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. You have the right, and it is your prerogative to say, I'll get back to you tomorrow or answer tomorrow. Okay, so again, back to this isolation and burnout feeding each other. Loneliness creates burnout. It is a documented fact that we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country, and it hits women particularly hard. It is in our DNA to be in relationship and to be connected with others. So you're doing and doing and giving, and you burn out and you're exhausted. It's harder and harder to connect with people. And so you end up isolated. And so the isolation drives the burnout, and the burnout feeds the isolation. We're going to take a really quick commercial break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how to end this vicious cycle and why there is hope in burnout recovery. We'll be right back. So welcome back. And if you've stayed tuned in to this point in the show, I'm going to assume that either you are in some phase of burnout or you're recognizing yourself in this, or you may know someone in your life that is facing burnout and doesn't realize it. It's not something that raises its hand and goes, ooh, 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 pick me, pick me. It's something that creeps in over time, and it can be really challenging to recognize, especially in yourself. And again, we're talking about this connection between isolation and burnout and how they feed each other. And so the really good news in all of this is that the hope and sometimes the solution to burnout and isolation are one and the same. Okay. I really want you to recognize burnout is not a life sentence. It's a chapter. It might be even a book. And so the day I got laid off from my corporate job, God told me this is the end of an era. And I thought he meant it was the end of my corporate career era because I've been in corporate for 40 some years. What he showed me later, what he meant by the end of an era, is that it was the end of me doing everything in my own strength. I was doing stuff for God. He wanted me to do it with him. And that's a huge difference. Okay. And so as you think about where you are in burnout, and in a future episode, we're going to talk about that there is mild, moderate, and severe burnout. They're different phases. Again, you don't go from being fully functional to severe burnout overnight, typically. There's mild, there's moderate, severe. It's a continuum, it's a progression. And wherever you find yourself on that scale, the steps back are pretty much the same. And I talk about rest as a weapon. And over this last year, over and over and over, I've been told to rest. I don't do that very well. I don't know how to relax. And so I've had to learn. I've had to give myself permission to slow down, to step back, to put that thinking time on my calendar. And I also want to quickly touch on the fact that different personality styles are triggered into burnout differently, and the recovery from burnout is different. So I use DISC as one of the personality styles that I do with my coaching clients. And so each of the 4 different personality styles have different needs of what rest looks like to them. And so for my personality style, I need what we call white space. I need that margin, and I need more of it than most other people. And so when I'm working a full-time job and another 20 hours a week on my own business, there was 0 white space. There was no margin. And so I've had to learn to build in that white space. And the one thing I will tell you as we kind of wrap up today, your physical body will put boundaries where your mind and your spirit don't. Because my body over the last year will hit a point in the day or even the week and just say, you're done. And it is not something I can force or push beyond. It is a hard physical limit. And I'm having to learn to obey and recognize and honor that limit. And it's a process, not an event. And so again, I really want to encourage you. There is hope. And we talk about rest as part of the mechanism for recovery, but full recovery is really the goal of burnout. And it can take weeks, it can take months, and in some document cases, it can actually take years. And so I'm going to just mention a quick scripture here, and it's Psalms 118:17. I shall not die, but live and declare the works of the Lord. There is always hope in burnout recovery. Burnout can be like a kind of death, the death of your energy, the death of your joy, and the death of your sense of self. But it's not the end of the story. There's resurrection on the other side of depletion. You don't only survive this, you're going to live to be full capacity again. And so we kind of talk about the unshakable key for my episodes. So this week's unshakable key is that burnout is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of recovery and healing. The next chapter is even better. And I am just starting to write my next chapter. And I'm excited about it. I have hope for the future again. I'm looking forward to completing my recovery and fully being able to step in authentically into what the next chapter is holding for me. And so join us again next week. I'm actually going to have a guest on who's going to share about her personal burnout story and what she did to come back. Thanks for joining us today. This has been Unshakeable Uplift, where we are healed, uplifted, and unshakable. Thank you.